Hey everybody, so today we're going to talk about this lovely thing just for a brief second. So we have got the Royal Palace at Brighton. Now, this headline says that the Royal Refurb gives Brighton Pavilion back its treasures from 150 years on. It already has plenty of treasures in it, let me tell you. But what's very interesting is that you will, if you start digging into, which basically means starts looking up on Google or on any of the other search sites, if you start looking up Brighton Pavilion, the Royal Palace at Brighton, that's where you really start to find out some of the things I've been talking to you about how Google and all these things you've been hearing about in Silicon Valley and censorship, that there really isn't something called the left. There really is just something called the royal families. You're really going to start to run into that here, because if it's just the left and it's just socialism, then these sorts of things I'm about to talk to you about wouldn't be happening. These sorts of things wouldn't be censored. The sorts of things we're running into right now wouldn't be occurring. So, they're talking about Royal Palace at Brighton here. It should be pretty cut and dry who built the palace, right? Who built the palace at Brighton, what the palace at Brighton is about, what year it was made, things like that. But what you'll notice is I did a video that I told you about it on my dig, and I said this palace was built by King George III right after he lost America, right? He did it in 1787. He built it right after he lost America. I said it looked just like the Taj Mahal, and it does. It looks just like the Taj Mahal, as if to say, hey, we still have India. India is much larger than America. What do we need it for? And even to say possibly we have China, because guess what? It's full of Asia. It looks just like China inside, which is very interesting since China and the Opium Wars weren't until the 1830s, around 1828. And yet all through the Royal Pavilion, it's red dragons, which makes you wonder how early they conquered China. Great Britain did. So when people say, is there a global conspiracy? I'm like, the globe has been under, the British Empire was a global empire hundreds of years ago. There isn't this global empire and this global plot and this global conspiracy. The question is, it was the empire the sun never set on, and America escaped it. And how long has it been trying to get us back into its clutches? That's all it is. Every world war has just been, trying to get America back underneath. I mean, it's been very, very interesting. Anyway, so when you look underneath here, it'll say the Royal Pavilion was built by, right underneath there, it will say, I don't know if you can see it, but it'll say it was built by King George the Fourth. I don't know if you can see that. So all of a sudden, it will say, hey, the Royal Pavilion was built by King George the Fourth, but was not to Queen Victoria's taste, and she sold it to Brighton Council in 1850. All right, and this is under, guess what? This is under, that's right, the Times. The Times, which has, of course, the royal crest on it. The royal crest of Queen Victoria and of Prince Albert. These signs and symbols suddenly make a lot more sense to us. They point things out to us. The royal press, all these things like Simmons and the fact where they come from suddenly mean a whole lot more. It is surprising that we have money. For example, it suddenly becomes very important to us that the only piece of money in the entire EU that wasn't changed was the British pound. If you notice, that's because it has the Queen's face on it. So everyone's money, the French franc, Italian money, everyone's money had to go except for the one with the Queen on it. Everyone wondered why the British pound was the one that didn't. Everyone in the entire EU, it all got changed. Everyone lost their currency except for Britain. Now that makes sense, knowing about the British pound, doesn't it? Anyway, so here it is. The London Times here is saying, hey, this Royal Pavilion was built by King George IV. Well, King George IV didn't become king until the 1800s. So that makes it sound like King George IV, not King George III, started building this thing. Everyone knows King George III as the one who, like 1700s, lost America, the Mad King George, the Mad King George. So this Times article actually says King George the Fourth built it. No, King George the Third built it. Even Wikipedia owns up to that. The Royal Pavilion, also known as Brighton Pavilion, is a Grade 1 listed former royal residence listed in Brighton. Beginning in 1787, it was built in 3 stages as a seaside retreat for George the Prince of Wales, who became Prince Regent in 1811. And of course, that George the Prince of Wales, well, that's just a lot of different Georges, isn't it? A lot of different Georges. But it was built as a retreat. Eventually, George Prince of Wales, the next George, they're always built for they're always built for their children. I was thinking about it. You know how they made vampires like publishing houses? I was telling you that when I was submitting my book for publishing, one of the young adult novels, I caught it. Numerous young adult novelist places said they're only accepting books for romance novels for the girls having to do with like royalty. Like only romance. And I was like, what do they do? Romance novels, it's all anti things out there. And it was like, and I looked at what they had out there and it was all this like romance and all these like kings and knights. And I was like, what's with all this like princess romance lit? Like what's with all the, until I saw what they're putting out there about all the royals and how much People magazine is putting out there about the royals and making the monarchs look great. And then I realized the generation before that, they did all this vampire lit. Ton of vampire lit. Well, vampire families, what were in all the vampire lit, it said all these vampire lit, even like True Blood, everything, these vampires were hella rich. Why were they hella rich? They were hella rich because the families had been around for forever. What families have been around for forever too? And just inherited, company upon company, thousands of years, lines that go way back, intermarrying. Just like vampires, those would be the monarchies. I cannot believe they're taking taxpayer monies as this actually goes on to say, oh yeah, $369 million refurbishment. $369 million in refurbishing. That's just Buckingham Palace. But they said some of these are going to be given back to that other royal palace, which makes me think they're going to... That royal palace, by the way, it looks like it's been cleaned. So I can only imagine how much they've paid to have that one through taxpayer funds, saying it's a historical site. Anytime it's historical, that means we can steal from the taxpayers to keep this up. It's just been very interesting. Oh, and one last thing I want to show you. Anyway, I'm going to show you that later. But what my point is that why would they change that? Why would they not say King George III, it was built by King George III. And then King George IV enjoyed it. Queen Victoria lived in it. In fact, up until 1970, the royals were living in it. Like Princess Charlotte lived in it in 1970. 1970, royals were living in this pavilion. So they may have given it to the council. Maybe, hey, you council take it over and take care of it. But are royals still living in it? You should check that out. Queen Victoria had a bedroom there. And that's very interesting what that bedroom looked like. You should look into it and see what Queen Victoria's bedroom looked like. Because it looks exactly like what Vivian Leigh wore in the very first thing they gave a very first award to at the very first Academy Awards. And the Academy Awards were shaped after what? Oh, something that the royal families invented. It's just very interesting. So that, it's just very interesting. Anyway, so I'm just saying that if it really was about leftism, if it was really about socialism, then why are they always constantly changing and muddling the facts about just basic monarch history? And things like, oh, it was built by King George III. Yes, it was built by King George III, but then when you go to things written about it, they're like, no, King George IV built it, or Queen Victoria actually didn't, or whatever. And then you go into the historical records and you're like, built in 1787. Yeah, King George III was like this big at that time. Like, what are you talking about? Like, or King George IV was this big. King George III was just, he was a young king at that time. Was he like 30 years old at that point? He was still ruling king, and he went on until like 1820 to still rule or something like that. Not even close to being done being king. King George IV didn't take that until it was well. You know, and that it, why are they fudging things like that? Why are they saying it's built by a king when it had been started by a totally different king? It was not built by the fourth. Maybe his father built it for him. Does it look like something built for him? And by the way, there's a ton of pictures of Queen Elizabeth in there as well. I don't think the monarchy's given it up. Should go see. Oh, and by the way, inside there, it's not just things of China in there. Like, it's not things of China in there. Like, there's things from India in there, yeah, but there's things from China in there, red dragons, and then there's things from Egypt in there. Like, it's not just the British Museum that has a ton of stuff. It's also, like, these palaces they've got around. They've got palaces all over England. It's very, very interesting. You should check it out. And that's my last question I want to leave you with. Why is it when you go to all these museums of art, they have put up, like the Louvre and the Met, they have put up all these things of all monarchies except for Britain's? That's because that's the one monarchy still going. They haven't let the public see any of that. That's the one monarchy still ruling the world. And that should scare you, because that's the monarchy upon which the sun never set. So when people are like, oh, there's a global conspiracy, I'm like, the sun never set on that thing 200 years ago. Like, there was an empire of the sun. Remember, the sun never set on it. It went around the world a long, long time ago. When they're building something in the 1700s that has both India and China in it, man, we are such a big loss. I swear we should really just be keeping our eyes open. Yeah, keeping our eyes open and wondering how we ever stayed free and how we can stay free. In my opinion, we should be paying attention to our local government way more. Local government. Like, if your roads aren't getting clean, that's where we should be keeping our eyes down. Not on our big government, local government. That's where the real freedom lies. All right, love you guys. Peace out.